The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty trading post, and when Beatrice Nelson stumbled out into the blazing Arizona sun, she looked more like a ghost than a woman of 22 years. Her dress hung in tatters, the once blue fabric now gray with trail dust and sweat stained beyond recognition. The hem dragged in the dirt, shredded from weeks of walking alongside wagons when the horses couldn't bear the extra weight. Her auburn hair, which she'd once kept pinned and proper, now hung in matted tangles down her back. She clutched a carpetbag that contained everything she owned in this world: a hairbrush with missing bristles, 2 threadbare handkerchiefs, and a tintype of parents she'd never see again. Beaver, Arizona Territory, wasn't much to look at in the summer of 1882. Main Street consisted of a general store, a saloon, the trading post, a small church, and a scattering of weathered buildings that seemed to hunker down against the relentless sun. Beyond the town, red rock formations rose like ancient sentinels, and somewhere in the distance cattle lowed. Beatrice's stomach clenched with hunger. She'd eaten nothing but hardtack and jerky for the past 3 days, rationing what little money she had left. The consumption that took her mother in Ohio had drained the family's savings, and then the influenza that claimed her father barely 2 months later had left her with nothing but debts. She'd sold everything to pay what was owed and bought passage west on the promise of work as a seamstress in Tucson. But when she'd arrived in Beaver to change coaches, she discovered the woman who'd hired her had died of snakebite, and there was no job waiting anymore. She stood on the boardwalk, swaying slightly in the heat, trying to decide what to do next. The driver had already disappeared into the saloon, and her fellow passengers had scattered to their own business. She was alone in a strange town with exactly $4.37 to her name. "Miss, you all right there?" The voice came from her left, deep and edged with concern. Beatrice turned to find a man watching her from the shade of the trading post's overhang. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water after rain. He wore a clean shirt tucked into well-made trousers, and his boots, though dusty, were of good quality. A cattleman, she guessed, or a rancher. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "I'm fine, thank you," Beatrice said, though her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. Her knees chose that moment to buckle. The man moved fast, catching her before she hit the ground. His arms were strong, his grip gentle despite the obvious muscle in his frame. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday," she lied. "It had been longer, come on." He guided her toward the general store, one hand supporting her elbow. "I'm Yates Zimmerman. I own a ranch about 8 miles north of here, and you are Beatrice Nelson." She wanted to pull away to maintain some dignity, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. "I can't accept charity, Mr. Zimmerman. It's not charity, it's basic human decency." He pushed open the door to the general store, where the proprietor, a round man with spectacles, looked up from his ledger. "Charlie, get some bread and cheese and that dried beef, and a jar of preserves." "Right away, Mr. Zimmerman." Yates led Beatrice to a chair near the cold stove and pressed her into it. "Sit. Eat when Charlie brings the food. Then you can tell me what brought you to Beaver looking like you've been dragged behind a wagon train." The proprietor returned quickly with the requested items, plus a canteen of water. Beatrice tried to protest again, but the moment the bread touched her lips, her body took over. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger, trying to maintain some semblance of manners while her empty stomach demanded more. Yates watched without comment, his expression thoughtful. When she'd finished half the bread and most of the cheese, she finally felt steady enough to speak properly. "I came for a job that doesn't exist anymore," she explained, her fingers twisting the fabric of her ruined dress. "I was supposed to work as a seamstress in Tucson, but the woman who hired me died. I don't have enough money to get back east, and even if I did, there's nothing for me there. My parents are gone. The house is sold. I thought I could find work here, at least temporarily, but I don't know this place or anyone in it." Yates leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. "Can you really sew?" "Yes, sir. My mother taught me from the time I could hold a needle. I can mend, alter, make clothes from scratch. I can embroider, do lacework, all of it." "Can you cook?" Beatrice blinked at the change in subject. "Yes, though I'm better with sewing." "Can you keep a house clean, manage supplies, deal with ranch hands who track in half the desert on their boots?" She straightened in the chair, understanding dawning. "Are you offering me employment, Mr. Zimmerman?" "I am. My housekeeper quit 3 months ago to go live with her daughter in California. I've been making do with my cook, Miguel, but he's got enough to handle feeding the hands without worrying about the main house too. I need someone who can keep the place running, mend clothes when they need it, and generally make sure everything doesn't fall to pieces. I can offer you room, board, and $30 a month." $30. It was more than she'd expected to make in Tucson. "That's very generous. It's fair. The work's hard and the ranch is isolated. You'd have your own room in the main house, take your meals with me, and have Sundays off unless something urgent comes up. I run cattle, breed horses. I've got 15 hands working for me year-round, more during roundup. It's a big operation and I need someone I can trust." He paused, his gaze direct. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Nelson. I'm offering this because you need help and I need a housekeeper, but also because you look like someone who knows what it means to work hard. Am I wrong?" "No, sir. I've worked hard all my life." "Then we have an agreement." Beatrice looked down at her ruined dress, at the dirt under her fingernails, at the worn-through soles of her shoes visible beneath her hem. Then she looked at Yates Zimmerman, at his honest face and steady eyes, and made a decision that would change everything. "Yes, Mr. Zimmerman. We have an agreement." He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his whole face. "Call me Yates, and the first order of business is getting you some proper clothes. Charlie, we need fabric, thread, needles, everything Miss Nelson needs to make herself a few dresses and whatever else women require." "Oh, I can't ask you to pay for that," Beatrice protested. "You didn't ask. I'm offering. Can't have my housekeeper wearing rags. Besides, consider it an advance on your wages if it makes you feel better. You can pay me back a little each month." Charlie was already pulling bolts of fabric from the shelves, practical calicos and sturdy cottons in blues and browns and a soft green that reminded Beatrice of spring leaves. There was enough for at least 3 dresses, plus underthings, a new chemise, stockings, and a pair of proper shoes. "This is too much," Beatrice whispered. "It's what you need," Yates replied simply. "Now I've got a wagon outside. We can head out to the ranch whenever you're ready. There's a guest room you can use tonight, and tomorrow you can get settled properly." The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours, following a rough track that wound through scrubland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. Yates drove the wagon with easy competence, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the ranch as they went. "The Rocking Z has been in operation for 8 years now. I started with 50 head of cattle and a dream. Now we're running nearly 2,000 head, plus the horse breeding operation. The main house isn't fancy, but it's solid. Adobe and timber, built to last and stay cool in summer." As they crested a rise, Beatrice caught her first glimpse of the ranch spread out in the valley below. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a sprawling structure with a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Outbuildings clustered nearby: bunkhouse, barn, stables, smokehouse, and several others she couldn't immediately identify. Corrals held horses in various colors, and in the distance, she could see cattle dotting the range eland. "It's beautiful," she said, meaning it. "It's home." There was pride in Yates's voice, the kind that came from building something with your own hands. "I bought this land when it was nothing but dirt and hope. Every building, every fence post, every head of cattle represents something I worked for. I'm not rich, but I'm doing all right, and I aim to keep it that way." He pulled the wagon up in front of the main house, and immediately a man emerged from what Beatrice assumed was the cookhouse. He was older, perhaps 60, with silver-streaked dark hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent a lifetime under the sun. "Miguel, this is Miss Beatrice Nelson. She's going to be our new housekeeper. Miss Nelson, this is Miguel Cortez, the best cook in the territory and the man who keeps all of us fed." Miguel's face broke into a warm smile. "Welcome, Miss Nelson. It's very good to have someone to help run the house." "Mr. Yates, he tries, but he is better with cows than with keeping things organized." "I heard that," Yates said, but he was grinning. "Help me get Miss Nelson's things inside, will you? And see if you can rustle up some supper. She needs a proper meal." The interior of the house was as solid as its exterior promised. The main room held a large stone fireplace, comfortable furniture that showed signs of use, and windows that let in the fading afternoon light. Everything was clean but clearly lacked a woman's touch. The furniture needed polishing, the curtains were dusty, and Beatrice could see cobwebs in the corners. Yates showed her to a bedroom on the main floor, a generous space with a real bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "This will be your room. There's water in the pitcher, fresh linens in the chest. Take some time to rest and wash up if you like. Supper will be ready in about an hour." After he left, Beatrice stood in the center of the room and felt tears prick her eyes. Just this morning she'd been hopeless, hungry, and alone. Now she had a roof over her head, employment, and the promise of a future. She sent up a silent prayer of thanks and then set about making herself presentable. The water in the pitcher was cool and clean. She washed her face and hands, tried to do something with her tangled hair, and changed into the least ragged of her 2 remaining dresses. It wasn't much of an improvement, but it would have to do until she could sew something better. Supper was a revelation. Miguel served beef stew thick with vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Beatrice ate at the kitchen table with Yates and Miguel, and the conversation flowed easily. Yates asked about her life in Ohio, and she told him about growing up in a small town, learning her trade, caring for her parents through their illnesses. "That must have been hard, being so young and losing them both so close together," Yates said quietly. "It was. But dwelling on sadness doesn't change anything. I have to look forward now, not back. That's a good philosophy." He pushed back from the table, his plate empty. "I do the same thing, lost my parents to cholera when I was 17. Worked as a ranch hand for 10 years, saved every penny, and then bought this land. Building the rocking Z gave me purpose when I needed it most." Beatrice saw the understanding in his eyes, the recognition of shared grief. It created an unexpected connection between them, a sense that they understood each other in ways that went beyond words. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Beatrice felt safe. She could hear the sounds of the ranch settling in for the evening, horses nickering in the corrals, an owl hooting somewhere in the darkness, the distant lowing of cattle. It was so different from the cramped boarding houses and jolting stagecoaches of recent weeks. She fell asleep with a sense of gratitude and woke to sunlight streaming through her window. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Beatrice rose early, before the sun crested the mountains, and set about learning the rhythms of the ranch. She cleaned the main house from top to bottom, discovering corners that hadn't seen attention in months. She washed curtains and beat rugs and polished every surface until it gleamed. She inventoried supplies and made lists of what was needed. She mended shirts and trousers for the ranch hands, who brought her torn garments with sheepish expressions and genuine gratitude. And in the evenings, by lamplight in her room, she sewed herself new dresses from the fabric Yates had bought. The work was painstaking but satisfying. She created simple, practical designs that would serve her well in her new role, with sturdy seams and sensible lines. Yates was often out on the range during the day, checking on cattle and horses, mending fences, and doing the 1,000 tasks that kept a ranch running. But he always returned for supper, and those meals became the highlight of Beatrice's day. They would sit at the kitchen table, sometimes joined by Miguel, and talk about everything and nothing. Yates told her about the challenges of ranching, the satisfaction of seeing a new foal take its first steps, the frustration of dealing with predators and drought. She told him about life in Ohio, about the books she'd read, about her dreams of seeing the ocean someday. Why the ocean? He asked one evening, genuinely curious. I don't know. I've just always imagined it, all that water stretching to the horizon. In Ohio, we had rivers and lakes, but they're not the same. The ocean seems like possibility itself. Maybe you'll get there someday. Maybe. She smiled, but it felt like a distant dream. One morning, nearly a month after her arrival, Beatrice was sweeping the porch when a group of riders approached the house. Yates emerged from the barn and went to meet them, and Beatrice recognized the easy camaraderie of men who'd worked together for years. These were his hands, returning from checking the northern pastures. One of them, a young man with sandy hair and a quick smile, tipped his hat to her. "Morning, miss. You must be the new housekeeper we've heard about. I'm Tom Sanders. Beatrice Nelson. Pleased to meet you." The men filed past, heading to the bunkhouse, but she noticed how they looked at her with curiosity and respect. Later, Yates explained that she'd made an impression. "The place looks better than it has in years," he said. The men notice things like that. They feel like the ranch is being cared for properly again. "I'm just doing my job. You're doing more than that. You're making this place a home again." The word stayed with Beatrice long after he'd ridden out to check on a problem with one of the water tanks. She realized, with some surprise, that the ranch was starting to feel like home to her too. She loved the quiet mornings and the spectacular sunsets. She loved the sense of purpose that came from a hard day's work. And increasingly, she found herself looking forward to Yates's return each evening, to the sound of his boots on the porch, to the way his face lit up when he saw that she'd prepared something special for supper. It was dangerous territory, letting herself care for her employer, but Yates made it impossible not to. He was unfailingly kind, quick to praise her work, and respectful of her privacy. He never made her feel like a servant, always treating her as an equal. When she finished her first new dress, a practical brown calico with a white collar, he'd noticed immediately. "That's fine work, Beatrice. You look lovely." She'd blushed at the compliment, unused to such attention. "It's nothing fancy. It suits you. The color brings out the red in your hair." She'd mumbled something about needing to check on the bread and fled to the kitchen, her heart hammering. Miguel had given her a knowing look, but said nothing. The second dress she made was the soft green fabric she'd admired in the store. It was still practical, suitable for her work, but she'd allowed herself a few small flourishes. A bit of pin-tucking at the bodice, delicate buttons she'd found in the sewing supplies. When she wore it for the first time, on a Sunday when she had the day off, Yates had stared at her for a long moment before finding his words. "You're beautiful." It wasn't a casual compliment. His voice was rough with sincerity, and his eyes held something that made her breath catch. "Thank you," she managed. They'd been standing in the main room, the morning sun pouring through the windows, and for a moment the air between them felt charged with possibility. Then Yates had cleared his throat and stepped back. "I'm riding into Beaver for supplies. Would you like to come? You could visit the general store, see if there's anything you need." The trip to town was pleasant, the conversation easy. Beatrice bought a few small items: more thread, a new thimble, a bar of lavender soap that was an extravagance she allowed herself. But what she treasured most was the time with Yates. The way he helped her down from the wagon with careful hands, the way he carried her packages without being asked, the way he introduced her to everyone they met with unmistakable pride. "This is Miss Beatrice Nelson, my housekeeper. She's been transforming the ranch into something civilized." People smiled and welcomed her, and Beatrice felt herself becoming part of the community. It was a heady feeling after so many weeks of loneliness and uncertainty. On the ride back, Yates was quieter than usual. Finally, as they neared the ranch, he spoke. "I know this isn't what you planned when you came west. You wanted to be a seamstress in Tucson, not a housekeeper on a cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere. If you ever want to leave to try for something different, I'll help you. I won't hold you to this job if you're not happy." Beatrice turned to look at him, surprised. "Why would you think I'm not happy? I just want you to know you have choices. You're not trapped here." "Yates." She waited until he met her eyes. "I'm happier here than I've been in a very long time. This ranch, this life, it's more than I dared hope for. I don't want to leave." The relief on his face was palpable. "Good. That's good." They didn't speak again until they reached the house, but something had shifted between them. The air felt lighter, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. Beatrice felt a flutter of hope she barely dared acknowledge. Summer deepened into August, and the heat became relentless. Beatrice learned to structure her work around the worst of it, rising even earlier to accomplish tasks before the sun turned the world to fire. She discovered the pleasure of sitting on the porch in the evenings with a glass of cool water, watching the sky turn from gold to crimson to deep purple. Yates often joined her there, and they would talk or simply sit in companionable silence. One evening, he brought out a guitar she hadn't known he owned and played a few simple melodies. His voice was untrained but pleasant, and she found herself charmed by this unexpected side of him. "My mother taught me," he explained when the last notes faded. "Said every man should know how to make music, even if he's not very good at it. I think you're better than you know. You're kind to say so." He set the guitar aside and leaned back in his chair, his gaze on the darkening sky. "Beatrice, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret coming west, leaving everything you knew behind?" She considered the question carefully. "At first, I was too scared and desperate to think about regret. Then I was too busy learning how to survive. Now," she paused, searching for the right words, "now I think it was the best thing that could have happened to me. If my parents were still alive, if I'd never lost the house, I'd still be in Ohio doing the same things I'd always done. I'd never have seen the desert or learned what I'm capable of. I'd never have met you." The last words slipped out before she could stop them. She felt her cheeks heat, grateful for the growing darkness that hid her blush. Yates was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and intense. "I'm glad you came west, Beatrice. I'm glad you stepped off that stagecoach in Beaver. I'm glad you're here." Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "So am I." He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, his grip warm and strong. They sat like that until the stars came out, neither willing to break the spell of the moment. Things changed after that evening. There was an acknowledged understanding between them now, an awareness that what they felt went beyond employer and employee, beyond friendship. Yates found excuses to touch her hand, her shoulder, her cheek. Beatrice caught herself watching for his return, her whole body coming alive when she heard his voice. Miguel noticed, of course. One afternoon, while Beatrice was helping him prepare preserves from the fruit trees near the house, he spoke up. "Mr. Yates, he is different since you came, happier. He seems like a happy person anyway. Is different. Before, he was content. Now he has joy. You give him that." Beatrice focused on stirring the pot of bubbling fruit. "I think you're reading too much into things, Miguel. I am old. I see what I see. He looks at you like a man who has found something precious. And you look at him the same way." She couldn't deny it. "Is that wrong? He's my employer. He is a good man who deserves happiness. You are a good woman who deserves the same. Where is the wrong in that?" Before she could answer, Yates himself appeared in the doorway, covered in dust and looking frustrated. "We've got a problem. Some of the cattle in the east pasture are sick. I need to ride to Beaver and fetch the veterinarian. Beatrice, I hate to ask, but could you pack me some food? I might need to stay out there overnight to help with the sick animals." "Of course. Give me 10 minutes." She worked quickly, assembling bread, cheese, dried meat, and fruit into a bundle he could carry in his saddlebags. She added a jar of the preserves they'd just made and a canteen of fresh water. When she handed everything to him, their fingers brushed, and she saw concern in his eyes. "Be careful," she said, "always am, but thank you for worrying." He hesitated, then leaned down and pressed a quick kiss to her forehead. "I'll be back as soon as I can." He was gone before she could react, leaving her standing in the kitchen with her hand pressed to where his lips had touched her skin. Miguel didn't say anything, but his smile said enough. Yates was gone for 2 days. The veterinarian determined that the cattle had gotten into some bad water, and they had to be moved and treated. Beatrice tried to keep busy with her usual tasks, but she found herself constantly looking toward the road, waiting for his return. When he finally rode in, tired and dusty but safe, she had to restrain herself from running to him. Instead, she waited on the porch, relief flooding through her. "You're back." "I'm back." He dismounted and handed his horse off to one of the hands, then climbed the porch steps. "Did you miss me?" "The house always feels different when you're gone." "Different how?" "Emptier." Something flared in his eyes. "Beatrice, I need to wash up and change, but after supper can we talk? There's something I need to say to you." Her pulse quickened. "All right." The meal seemed to last forever. Yates ate quickly, clearly as eager as she was for the conversation to come. Miguel served them and then made himself scarce, and finally they were alone. Yates pushed back from the table and stood, pacing to the window and back. "I'm not good with fancy words. I'm a plain man who works with his hands and spends most of his time around cattle and horses. But I need you to know something." Beatrice waited, barely breathing. "When you arrived in Beaver 2 months ago, I thought I was just helping someone in need. I thought I was hiring a housekeeper, solving a problem. But you've become so much more than that. You've made this house a home. You've made me look forward to coming back at the end of the day. You've made me realize how lonely I was before you came." He crossed to where she sat and dropped to one knee beside her chair, taking her hand in both of his. "I'm falling in love with you, Beatrice. Maybe I've already fallen. All I know is that when I was out there dealing with sick cattle, all I could think about was getting back to you. I know it's fast, and I know I'm probably rushing things, but I can't keep pretending what I feel is just gratitude or friendship." Tears blurred Beatrice's vision. "You're not rushing things. I feel the same way. I've been falling in love with you since the day you caught me when I nearly fainted in Beaver. Since you bought me food and clothes and gave me a chance when I had nothing. Since you made me feel valuable and seen and cared for." Yates lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "Then I have a question for you, and you can take all the time you need to answer. Beatrice Nelson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you work for me or because you feel obligated, but because you want to build a life with me." "Yes." The word came out without hesitation. "Yes, Yates, I'll marry you." He stood, pulling her up with him, and wrapped her in his arms. Then he kissed her, a gentle press of lips that quickly deepened into something more passionate. Beatrice melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her whole being focused on the taste and feel of him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to do right by you, Beatrice. I'm going to give you everything I have. You arrived here wearing rags, but I'm going to dress you in silk. I'm going to treat you like the queen you are." "I don't need silk," she whispered. "I just need you. You'll have both. You'll have everything." The next week was a whirlwind of preparation. Yates insisted on riding to Beaver to send telegrams announcing their engagement and to make arrangements with the minister. Beatrice sewed herself a wedding dress from a bolt of cream-colored silk that Yates ordered specially from Tucson. It arrived within days, along with lace for trim and seed pearls for buttons. As she worked on the dress, her hands trembling with excitement and nerves, she could hardly believe how much her life had changed. Just 3 months ago, she'd been alone and desperate. Now she was preparing to marry a man who looked at her like she hung the moon. The wedding was small, held in the little church in Beaver on a Sunday morning in late September. The whole town turned out, curious and happy to celebrate. Beatrice wore her silk dress, and Yates wore a new suit that made him look both uncomfortable and incredibly handsome. Miguel stood as witness, beaming like a proud father. The minister spoke about love and partnership, about building a life together through good times and bad. Beatrice barely heard the words. She was too focused on Yates, on the way he held her hands, on the love shining in his eyes. "I do," she said when the time came, her voice clear and strong. "I do," Yates echoed, and then he was kissing her and the small congregation was cheering. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch. Miguel had outdone himself, preparing a feast that seemed impossible for one man to have created. There was music and dancing, and Beatrice found herself passed from partner to partner as the ranch hands and townspeople all wanted to congratulate her. But always her eyes sought out Yates, and always he was watching her with that same look of wonder. As the sun began to set, he claimed her for a final dance, holding her close as someone played a slow waltz on a fiddle. "Happy," he murmured against her ear. "More than I ever thought possible." "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." The guests eventually departed, and suddenly the ranch was quiet again. Yates and Beatrice stood on the porch, watching the last wagon disappear down the road. "Alone at last," Yates said with a grin. Then, before she could respond, he swept her up into his arms. "I believe there's a tradition about carrying brides over thresholds." Beatrice laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I think that's just for the first time entering a house. Then we'll make a new tradition. I'm carrying you because I want to, because you're my wife now, and because I love you." He carried her inside and up the stairs to what was now their shared room. He'd spent the past week preparing it, moving his things in alongside hers, making it a space for both of them. There were fresh flowers on the dresser and someone had turned down the bed. Yates set her gently on her feet, his hands settling on her waist. "Are you nervous?" "A little," she admitted, "but in a good way. We can go as slow as you need. We have all the time in the world." But Beatrice didn't want to go slow. She'd spent enough of her life being careful, being practical. Tonight, she wanted to be bold. She reached up and began unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers fumbling only slightly. "Beatrice," he breathed. "Show me," she whispered. "Show me what it means to be loved by you." He did, with gentle hands and patient kisses, with murmured words of love and praise. He made her feel cherished and desired, beautiful and brave. And when the morning sun streamed through their window, Beatrice woke in her husband's arms and felt truly home for the first time since her parents died. The months that followed were the happiest of Beatrice's life. She settled into her role as Yates's wife with the same determination she'd brought to being his housekeeper, but now everything was infused with love and partnership. They made decisions together about the ranch, planned for the future together, built their life together. Yates kept his promise about treating her like a queen. He ordered more silk from Tucson, along with soft wool and fine cotton. Beatrice sewed herself dresses in colors she'd never dared wear before: deep blue, rich burgundy, emerald green. She made evening gowns with lace overlays and day dresses with elaborate pleating. It wasn't vanity. It was Yates's joy in seeing her wear beautiful things, in being able to provide them for her. "You look like royalty," he told her one evening when she appeared in a new gown of midnight blue silk with silver trim. "My queen." "I'm just a ranch wife," she protested, though she couldn't help smiling. "You're my queen," he repeated firmly, "and don't you forget it." Winter came to the Arizona territory, not with snow but with cold nights and crisp mornings. Beatrice learned to love this new season, the way the desert transformed under frost, the way the mountains stood stark against the pale sky. She and Yates would sit before the fireplace in the evenings, her head on his shoulder, planning for the spring. "I want to expand the horse breeding program," he told her. "We've got good stock and there's demand for quality horses. If we play it right, we could double our income in a few years." "What would you do with the extra money? Save it. Invest it. Maybe buy some of the land to the west, expand our range." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Build a legacy for our children." Children. They hadn't talked much about it, but Beatrice found herself hoping, praying. She wanted to give Yates sons and daughters, wanted to fill the ranch house with laughter and life. In February, her prayers were answered. She realized she'd missed her monthly courses and felt a flutter of excitement mixed with fear. When she told Yates, he picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy. "We're going to have a baby. Careful," she laughed. "Put me down before you drop your child." He set her gently on her feet, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach. "Our child, I can't believe it." "When?" "I think sometime in September. I'm not entirely sure yet. We need to get the doctor out here to check on you, and you should rest more. Let Miguel handle more of the work." "Yates, I'm pregnant, not ill. I can still do my regular tasks." But he fussed over her anyway, and she found it endearing rather than annoying. He brought her breakfast in bed, insisted she take naps in the afternoon, worried if she so much as frowned. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Beatrice felt well most of the time, though there were mornings when the smell of cooking made her queasy. Her body changed, her belly swelling with their growing child, and Yates seemed to find her more beautiful with each passing week. "You're glowing," he told her, running his hands over her rounded stomach. "You've never been more lovely. I'm fat and ungainly. You're carrying our baby. You're perfect." In September, as the heat of summer began to ease, Beatrice went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when she thought she couldn't continue. But Yates was there, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, encouraging her through every contraction. "You can do this, my love. You're the strongest person I know, just a little more." And then, after hours of struggle, a baby's cry filled the room. The doctor held up a squirming, red-faced infant. "It's a boy, a healthy baby boy." Beatrice fell back against the pillows, exhausted and elated. Yates was crying, tears streaming down his face as the doctor cleaned the baby and placed him in Beatrice's arms. "A son," Yates whispered. "We have a son." The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same gray-green as his father's. They named him James, after Yates's father, and called him Jamie. Fatherhood transformed Yates in ways Beatrice hadn't anticipated. He was gentle and patient with the baby, changing diapers and walking the floor during fussy nights without complaint. He sang to Jamie in his rough voice, the same songs his mother had taught him. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it smooth so there wouldn't be any splinters. The ranch hands were equally smitten. They took turns visiting to see the baby, bringing carved wooden toys and awkward but heartfelt congratulations. Miguel appointed himself honorary grandfather, showing up with dishes designed to help Beatrice regain her strength. As Jamie grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Yates's gamble on the horse breeding program paid off handsomely. They sold quality stock to ranchers across the territory and even to buyers from California and Texas. The additional income allowed them to buy the land Yates had wanted, expanding the Rocking Z into one of the larger operations in the area. But success didn't change Yates. He remained the same kind, hardworking man Beatrice had fallen in love with. He still came home every evening for supper, still made time to sit with her on the porch, still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. When Jamie was 2, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with calm joy rather than wild celebration. They knew what to expect, felt prepared. The second birth was easier than the first. In May of 1886, they welcomed a daughter. She had Beatrice's auburn hair and Yates's eyes, and they named her Rose after Beatrice's mother. "Now we have our little prince and princess," Yates said, holding Rose while Jamie climbed on his lap. "Our family is complete." But apparently, fate had other plans. 2 years later, when Jamie was 4 and Rose was 2, Beatrice found herself pregnant once more. The third baby, another boy they named Thomas, arrived in March of 1888. He was the easiest of the 3, a placid baby who rarely cried and slept through the night from an early age. The ranch house, once so quiet and empty, now rang with children's laughter. Beatrice had help now. A young woman from Beaver named Sarah who assisted with the children and the housework. But Beatrice still loved being involved in every aspect of ranch life, still took pride in keeping her home beautiful, still sewed clothes for her family. And the silk dresses Yates had promised her. She had a wardrobe full of them now, gorgeous gowns in every color. She wore them to church on Sundays, to occasional social events in Beaver, to quiet dinners at home when Yates wanted to celebrate something. He never tired of seeing her dressed beautifully, never stopped calling her his queen. On their 10th anniversary, Yates arranged for Sarah to watch the children for the evening and took Beatrice on a picnic to a spot overlooking the ranch. They sat on a blanket as the sun set, the valley spread out below them painted in shades of gold and amber. "Do you remember the day you arrived in Beaver?" Yates asked, refilling her glass of wine. "How could I forget? I was half-starved and wearing rags with nowhere to go and no prospects. I took one look at you and knew my life was about to change. I didn't know how yet, but I knew." Beatrice leaned against his shoulder. "I thought you were just being kind to a stranger." "I was, but I was also drawn to you from that first moment. Your courage, your dignity despite your circumstances, the way you held your head high even when you must have been terrified. You were extraordinary then, and you're extraordinary now. I'm just a wife and mother. You're my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. The woman who transformed a house into a home, a lonely rancher into a happy husband and father. You're the queen of this ranch and of my heart." She turned to kiss him, still feeling the same flutter in her stomach that she'd felt when he first kissed her all those years ago. "And you're my king. My love. The man who saved me and then showed me what it means to truly live." They stayed on the hilltop until the stars came out, talking about their children, their plans for the future, their dreams. Jamie was already showing an interest in the horses, following his father around whenever possible. Rose was clever and imaginative, always telling stories and drawing pictures. Thomas was still young, but he had a sweet nature that charmed everyone he met. "We've built something good here," Yates said. "Not just the ranch, but our family, our life together. I'm proud of what we've accomplished. So am I." As they rode back to the house, Beatrice reflected on the unlikely path that had brought her here. If someone had told her 10 years ago, when she was desperate and alone in Beaver, that she would end up happy, loved, and surrounded by family, she wouldn't have believed them. But sometimes, life surprised you in the best possible ways. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard years when drought threatened the cattle, years when prices fell and money was tight. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal trials of ranch life. But through it all, Beatrice and Yates faced everything together, their love growing deeper with each passing season. Jamie grew into a capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. At 18, he was already taking on major responsibilities, managing portions of the operation with skill beyond his years. Rose, at 16, was beautiful and spirited, with her mother's way with a needle and her father's head for business. Thomas, at 14, was the peacemaker of the family, equally comfortable working with the horses or helping his mother in the house. Beatrice was 42 now, with silver threads in her auburn hair and laugh lines around her eyes. But when Yates looked at her, she still saw the same love and admiration she'd seen when she was 22 and wearing her first silk dress. "You're still beautiful," he told her one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset as they'd done countless times before. "More beautiful now than ever. You're biased. I'm honest. You're the woman I love, the mother of my children, my partner in everything. You're my queen, Beatrice. You always will be." She took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength in his grip. They'd built a good life together, better than she'd ever dreamed possible. The ranch was prosperous, their children were healthy and happy, and their love had only grown stronger with time. Sometimes, late at night, Beatrice would think back to that day in Beaver when she'd stumbled off the stagecoach wearing rags and carrying everything she owned in a worn carpetbag. She'd been so lost, so afraid, so uncertain of what the future held. And then Yates Zimmerman had caught her when she fell, fed her when she was hungry, given her a job when she was desperate, and ultimately given her his heart. He dressed her in silk and called her his queen, and in doing so, he'd shown her that love wasn't just about grand gestures or pretty words. It was about partnership and respect, about building something together, about choosing each other every single day. As the Arizona sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Beatrice leaned her head on her husband's shoulder and smiled. She'd come west looking for work and found so much more. She'd found home. She'd found family. She'd found love that would last a lifetime. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked softly. "Everything. How far we've come, how grateful I am. I'm the grateful one. You gave me everything I didn't even know I needed." We gave each other everything, she corrected. That's what love does. He kissed her temple, his arm tightening around her shoulders. My queen, my king. And there, on the porch of the ranch they'd built together, surrounded by the life they'd created, they watched the stars come out over the Arizona desert and counted their blessings. The ranch continued to thrive as the new century approached. By 1899, the Rocking Z was one of the most respected operations in the territory. Jamie had married a sweet girl from Beaver named Elizabeth, and they were expecting their first child, which would make Beatrice and Yates grandparents. Rose had attracted several suitors but hadn't yet chosen among them, claiming she was in no hurry to settle down. Thomas had announced his intention to study veterinary medicine, wanting to help animals the way the veterinarian had helped their cattle all those years ago. Yates was 50 now, his dark hair liberally streaked with silver, but he was still strong and active, still running the ranch with the same dedication he'd always shown. Beatrice, at 44, had softened slightly with age but remained vibrant and involved in everything around her. One spring morning, Beatrice was working in her garden when a stagecoach stopped in front of the house. A young woman stepped down, and Beatrice's heart clenched with recognition. Not because she knew this girl, but because she saw herself in her. The worn dress, the desperate eyes, the air of someone who'd come to the end of their rope. Yates emerged from the barn and approached the girl. Beatrice watched as he spoke to her, saw the kindness in his expression, the same kindness he'd shown her all those years ago. Then he gestured toward the house, and the girl followed him. Beatrice, Yates called. This is Miss Anna Porter. She's come from Kansas looking for work. I thought perhaps Rose could use some help with her sewing projects since she's been taking on so many orders from town. Beatrice understood immediately. He was offering this girl the same chance he'd once offered her. She smiled and wiped her hands on her apron. Of course. Come in, dear. You must be tired and hungry from your journey. As she led Anna into the house and began preparing food, Beatrice caught Yates's eye. He winked at her, and she felt a surge of love for this man who never stopped being kind, who never forgot what it was like to struggle, who always looked for ways to help others. That evening, after Anna had been fed and settled in the guest room, Yates and Beatrice sat on their porch once more. You did a good thing today, Beatrice said. I learned from the best. Someone once taught me that a little kindness can change a life. That someone was you. You changed my life, Yates, and you changed mine, my love. You took a lonely rancher and made him the happiest man alive. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the familiar landscape soften in the fading light. The ranch was peaceful, the cattle settled for the evening, the horses quiet in their corrals. Somewhere in the house, Anna was probably wondering what the future held, just as Beatrice had once wondered. But Beatrice knew now that the future wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace, to build, to face together with the people you loved. She'd learned that lesson from a kind rancher who'd seen past her ragged dress to the woman beneath. He'd given her silk and called her his queen, but more importantly, he'd given her love, partnership, and a life beyond her wildest dreams. I love you, she said softly. I love you too, Yates replied. Today, tomorrow, and always. The stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, every joy and sorrow they'd experienced together. And beneath those stars, a rancher and his queen sat side by side, grateful for the journey that had brought them together and excited for whatever the future might hold. Their story had begun with a desperate woman in rags and a compassionate man willing to help. It had grown into a love that transformed them both, a partnership that built something lasting, a legacy that would continue through their children and grandchildren. It was a story of second chances and new beginnings, of finding home in unexpected places, of love that endured through every season. And it was, by any measure, a very good story indeed. Jamie and Elizabeth's son was born in the summer of 1899, a healthy boy they named Yates, after his grandfather. Beatrice held her grandson for the first time and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't thought possible. This tiny person represented the future, the continuation of everything she and Yates had built together. "He has your eyes," she told Yates as they admired the baby together. "And your hair looks like, see those auburn hints." They were grandparents now, entering a new phase of life. But neither of them felt old. If anything, Beatrice felt more alive than ever, excited to watch her children become parents, to guide her grandchildren as they grew. Rose eventually chose a suitor, a young lawyer from Tucson named Daniel Wright, who had the patience to court her properly and the wisdom to appreciate her independent spirit. Their wedding in 1901 was the social event of the season, with guests coming from all over the territory. Beatrice made her daughter's wedding dress, an elaborate creation of ivory silk and lace that took 3 months to complete. "Mama, it's beautiful," Rose breathed when she saw herself in the mirror. "I look like a princess. You are a princess, and you're going to be very happy." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "As happy as you and Papa." "I hope so, sweetheart. I hope you find exactly what I found. A partner who respects you, who values you, who loves you for who you are." Thomas went off to university in 1902 to study veterinary medicine, leaving the ranch quieter but no less full. He came home for holidays bursting with knowledge and enthusiasm, eager to share what he'd learned. Yates listened with pride as his youngest son talked about anatomy and treatments, about his dreams of returning to help the ranchers of the territory care for their animals better. The years rolled on, each one bringing changes but also constants. The ranch remained the center of their lives, though Jamie had taken over more of the daily operations. Yates still rode out most days, unable to fully retire from the work he loved. Beatrice still tended her garden, still sewed beautiful things, still kept the house running smoothly with Sarah's help. Anna, the girl who'd arrived so desperate and lost, had blossomed under their care. She worked for Rose's sewing business and had developed real talent. She'd also caught the eye of one of the ranch hands, and Beatrice suspected there would be another wedding soon. In 1905, on their 23rd anniversary, Yates surprised Beatrice with a trip to California. "You said once you wanted to see the ocean," he reminded her. "I think it's time we made that happen." They traveled by train, a journey that would have been impossible when they first met. The world was changing rapidly, becoming more connected, more modern. But some things remained timeless, and the love between them was one of those things. When Beatrice finally stood on the beach in San Diego, feeling the Pacific breeze on her face and watching the waves roll endlessly to shore, she cried. Yates wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Is it everything you imagined? It's more. Everything in my life has been more than I imagined, thanks to you." They spent a week in California, exploring the coast, eating in restaurants, acting like newlyweds despite being in their 40s and 50s. It was glorious and romantic, a reminder that their love story was far from over. On the train ride home, Beatrice watched the landscape roll by and reflected on how different this journey was from her desperate trip west all those years ago. Then, she'd been alone and afraid. Now she was content and loved, traveling with her husband, returning to a home filled with family and joy. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, just as he had countless times over the years. "Everything. "Nothing. How happy I am." He took her hand and kissed it. "Good. That's all I've ever wanted." They returned to the ranch to find it running smoothly under Jamie's care. Young Yates was now 6 and already pestering to learn to ride. Rose was pregnant with her second child, glowing with happiness. Thomas had written to say he'd be graduating at the top of his class. Life was good. Life was very good indeed. As Beatrice and Yates entered their 60s, they gradually shifted from being the doers to being the advisors. Jamie ran the ranch with his father's guidance. Rose's sewing business had expanded into a shop in Beaver that employed 5 women. Thomas had returned to the territory and established a thriving veterinary practice, often working with the rocking Zetikes animals. They had 5 grandchildren now, with more on the way. The ranch house, which had once echoed with emptiness, now rang with the laughter of children during Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. Beatrice loved nothing more than watching Yates with the grandchildren, seeing him teach them to ride or telling them stories about the old days. "Remember when you first came here?" he asked her one evening as they sat in their favorite spot on the porch. "This place was so quiet you could hear a mouse sneeze. Now look at it." The yard was full of family. Jamie and Elizabeth were watching their oldest try to rope a fence post. Rose and Daniel were chasing their toddler daughter. Thomas was courting a young woman from Tucson and had brought her to meet the family. "You've built an empire," Beatrice said. "Not just a ranch, but a dynasty. We built it together. None of this would exist without you." She leaned into his shoulder, still fitting perfectly against him after all these years. "I think we make a good team. The best." In 1910, Arizona was on the cusp of statehood and the territory was changing rapidly. Automobiles were becoming more common, though Yates insisted horses would never be fully replaced. Telephones had been installed in Beaver, connecting the town to the wider world. The ranch had electricity now, a modern marvel that still amazed Beatrice when she flipped a switch and light flooded the room. But despite all the changes, some things remained constant. Yates still looked at her with love in his eyes. She still felt her heart skip when he walked into a room. They still sat on the porch every evening, watching the sunset and talking about their day. They still shared a bed every night, wrapped in each other's arms. On Beatrice's 65th birthday, the family threw her a party that brought together people from all over the territory. Friends, neighbors, business associates, all came to celebrate the woman who had become a pillar of the community. There were speeches and toasts, gifts and laughter. But the moment Beatrice treasured most came later, when it was just her and Yates alone in their room. He presented her with a box, and inside was a necklace of emeralds and diamonds. "Yates, this is too much," she protested, though the jewelry was exquisite. "Nothing is too much for my queen. I've been setting aside money for years to buy you this. Emeralds to match your green dress, the one you made when you first arrived. The one where I first realized I was falling in love with you." She let him fasten the necklace around her throat, feeling the weight of the gems, the warmth of his fingers on her skin. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who had been loved well, who had lived fully, who had no regrets. "Thank you," she whispered. "For this, for everything, for the life we've built together. Thank you for saying yes to a rough rancher who didn't know what he was doing but knew he'd found something precious." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never dimmed. Age had changed their bodies, but not the connection between them, not the desire they felt for each other. Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, becoming the 48th state in the Union. The celebration in Beaver was enormous, and the Zimmerman family was there in force. Yates, at 63, gave a speech about the growth he'd witnessed, the the transformation of a wild territory into a proper state. "When I came here as a young man," he said, "this was untamed country. Now we have schools and churches, businesses and communities. We've built something lasting, something we can be proud of, and I couldn't be happier to see Arizona take its rightful place in the United States." The crowd cheered, and Beatrice watched her husband with pride. He'd been part of this growth, had contributed to it with his ranch, his work, his presence in the community. He was respected and admired, and rightfully so. That evening, back at the ranch, they sat on their porch and looked out at the land they'd worked for 30 years. "We're part of history now," Beatrice mused. "Our grandchildren will tell their children about the day Arizona became a state, and we were there to see it. And they'll tell them about their great-grandparents who helped build this place, who came west with nothing and created something that lasted. You came west with nothing. I came west with less than nothing. And together, we built everything. It was true." The rocking Z now sprawled across thousands of acres. The horse breeding program Yates had started was known across the Southwest. The family had interests in businesses in Beaver and Tucson. They'd created jobs, supported the community, raised good children who were now raising their own families. But more than any material success, they'd created a love that had endured through every trial, every joy, every season of life. They'd proven that two people from different worlds could come together and build something beautiful. As they entered their 70s, Beatrice and Yates slowed down considerably. They spent most of their time at the ranch, content to let the younger generation take the lead. They gardened together, took slow rides around the property, entertained their grandchildren, and enjoyed the peace they'd earned. On their 40th anniversary in 1915, the family threw an enormous celebration. The entire town of Beaver turned out, along with people from neighboring towns and ranches. There was dancing and food, speeches and laughter. Beatrice wore a new gown of silver silk that Yates had commissioned from a dressmaker in Tucson, and she'd never felt more beautiful. Jamie stood to give a toast. "My parents have shown us all what love looks like, what partnership looks like, what it means to build something together and never give up on each other. Dad, you always said Mom was your queen, and you've treated her like royalty every day of their marriage. Mom, you've stood by Dad through everything, been his partner in every sense of the word. You've shown us how to love, how to work, how to live. We're all better people because of your example." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Later, when they were alone again, Yates took Beatrice in his arms. 40 years. Can you believe it? Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like forever. Always it feels like exactly what I was meant to do. I love you, Beatrice Zimmerman. I loved you when you were 22 and wearing rags. I loved you when you walked down the aisle in silk. I love you now, with silver in your hair and lines on your face. I'll love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Yates. You saved me, transformed me, showed me what life could be. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." They danced alone in their living room, swaying to music only they could hear, and it was perfect. Time marched inexorably forward. The world changed around them with increasing speed. The Great War raged in Europe, though it felt distant from their ranch in Arizona. New inventions arrived regularly: better automobiles, radios, improved farming equipment. The ranch modernized, though Yates insisted on keeping some of the old ways. "I'm not going to completely abandon horses for trucks," he insisted. "A man should know how to ride, how to rope, how to work the land the way it was meant to be worked." Thomas agreed, though he also saw the value in progress. Between his veterinary knowledge and the new technologies available, He was able to improve the health and productivity of their herds in ways Yates had never imagined. In 1920, women gained the right to vote, and Beatrice cast her ballot with pride. She thought about the girl she'd been, arriving in rags with no prospects, and marveled at the woman she'd become. Property owner, matriarch of a large family, respected member of her community, and now a voter in a democracy. Yates was immensely proud of her. "My queen is now officially a citizen with full rights," he joked, "though you've always been the real power around here anyway." They were in their 70s now, slowing down considerably but still sharp-minded and involved in family affairs. They had 12 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The Rocking Z was now a multi-generational operation, with Jamie's children learning the ropes just as he had. One quiet afternoon, Beatrice was sitting in her garden when Sarah, who still worked for the family despite being elderly herself, brought out tea. "You've got a good life, Mrs. Zimmerman," Sarah said. "I remember when you first arrived looking so lost. Look at you now." "I've been blessed beyond measure," Beatrice agreed. "And it all started because a kind man offered help to a stranger. Mr. Zimmerman is a good man, but you're a good woman. You made each other better." It was true. They'd been partners in every sense, supporting each other's dreams, weathering storms together, celebrating victories as a team. Their love had been the foundation on which everything else was built. As the years continued to pass, Beatrice and Yates found themselves increasingly content to simply be together. They'd raised their family, built their ranch, achieved their goals. Now, in the twilight of their lives, they treasured the simple moments: morning coffee together, afternoon naps in the same bed, evening conversations on the porch. "You have any regrets?" Yates asked her one day. Beatrice considered the question carefully. "Only that we don't have more time. I wish I could live this life 100 times over. Then we've done it right." In the spring of 1925, Yates fell ill. It started as a simple cold but developed into pneumonia. Despite Thomas's best efforts and the doctors brought in from Tucson, he didn't improve. Beatrice rarely left his bedside, holding his hand and telling him stories about their life together. "Remember the day we met," she whispered. "You caught me when I nearly fainted." "Best catch I ever made," he murmured, his voice weak but his eyes still sharp. "Got me a queen." "And I got my king." He squeezed her hand. "No regrets, Beatrice, not a single one. You gave me everything. You gave me everything first." He smiled, that same smile that had won her heart all those years ago. "We gave each other everything. That's what love does." Yates Zimmerman passed away peacefully in his sleep on a warm April night, with Beatrice holding his hand and his family surrounding him. He was 76 years old and had lived a good, full life. The funeral was enormous. People came from all over Arizona to pay their respects to a man who had been a pillar of the community, a successful rancher, a loving husband and father. But Beatrice knew the eulogies, however heartfelt, couldn't capture who he really was. The man who'd shown kindness to a stranger, who'd kept every promise, who'd loved her completely for 43 years. The grief was overwhelming at first. Beatrice had never been truly alone since the day she met Yates, and his absence left a void nothing could fill. But she was surrounded by family, by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all carried pieces of him forward. Jamie took over the ranch completely, running it with the same dedication his father had shown. Rose continued her business and cared for Beatrice with fierce devotion. Thomas made sure his mother wanted for nothing, visiting often to check on her health and spirits. Beatrice lived on at the ranch for another decade, watching her family grow and thrive. She saw great-great-grandchildren born, saw the ranch continue to prosper, saw the legacy she and Yates had built continue to flourish. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch in her favorite chair, with Yates's empty chair beside her, and talk to him as if he were still there. She told him about the grandchildren's accomplishments, about changes to the ranch, about how much she missed him. "But I know we'll be together again," she would say. "And until then, I'm living the life we built. I'm loving our family. I'm honoring what we created together." Beatrice Zimmerman passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1935 at the age of 77. She was buried beside Yates on a hill overlooking the ranch they'd built together, under the wide Arizona sky they'd both loved. The rocking Z continued under Jamie's stewardship and eventually passed to his children. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to the vision and hard work of a rancher who'd taken a chance on a desperate woman in rags and loved her like a queen. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the Arizona desert, people swear they can see two figures sitting on the porch of the old ranch house, holding hands and watching the stars come out, together for all eternity. Their love story became legend in Beaver, told and retold to children and grandchildren. The tale of the woman who arrived in rags and the rancher who dressed her in silk, who saw her worth when she had nothing, who loved her completely and built an empire with her by his side. It was a story of second chances and enduring love, of partnership and respect, of two souls who found each other against all odds and created something beautiful that lasted long after they were gone. And in the end, it was a story with the happiest of endings. A life well lived, a love well loved, and a legacy that endured.